Good day and welcome to the Directors Dialogue, the official podcast of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Nigeria. I'm happy to have you join us today. The Directors Dialogue is a thought leadership platform designed to engage directors, founders, and senior executives in meaningful conversations around corporate governance, leadership, and business excellence. It also serves as a bridge connecting experienced leaders with emerging voices, policymakers, and global partners. The Chartered Institute of Directors Nigeria, established in 1983 and now chartered under the CIoD Act 2023, is the premier professional body for directors and business leaders in Nigeria, committed to advancing governance, leadership, development, and boardroom excellence. Today's episode is a particularly important one, brought to you by the Health and Social Services Sectoral Group of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Nigeria, a platform committed to strengthening governance and leadership capacity within Nigeria's ecosystem. Now, for today's conversation, we will be exploring a topic that is both deeply relevant and, quite frankly, not discussed enough in our boardrooms: pressure at the top and what it's really costing you. Directors operate in one of the most complex leadership environments where clinical accountability, governance responsibility, financial stewardship, and public scrutiny all converge. It's a space where decisions carry not only financial implications, but human consequences. And yet, despite this intensity, there remains a quiet but dangerous silence around the personal cost of leadership at the top. In this episode, we will be unpacking the anatomy of top-level pressure in leadership positions, how sustained stress impacts decision-making, judgment, and governance outcomes, the real financial implications of leadership burnout and attrition, the culture of silence in the C-suite, and why many leaders struggle to speak up. Practical, evidence-based approaches to sustaining leadership capacity, and most importantly, what boards and institutions must do better to support those at the helm of affairs. This is not just a conversation about well-being, it is a governance issue, a performance issue, and ultimately an organizational sustainability issue as well. If you are a director, a board member, a healthcare executive, or a policymaker, this is a conversation that speaks directly to the realities you navigate every day. Let me introduce our distinguished guest for today's episode. I'm especially pleased to be joined by someone who brings a rare and valuable perspective to this discussion as a medical doctor, a health system CEO, and a non-executive director with deep governance expertise. Dr. Pamela Ajayi, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Without much ado, I will read out her profile. Dr. Pamela Ajayi, CIoD, the chairman of the Health and Social Services Sectoral Group of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Nigeria. Dr. Pamela Ajayi is a visionary leader, entrepreneur, and healthcare advocate with expertise in medicine, policy, governance, and strategy. A pioneer in healthcare reform, she has driven public-private collaborations to improve healthcare delivery. She founded Pathcare Laboratories, now SynLab, West Africa, first ISO 15189 accredited laboratory setting standards in diagnostics and innovation. She is the creator and host of Doctors on Air, Nigeria's longest running healthcare radio program, reaching over 10 million listeners weekly. Dr. Ajayi is chairman of the Bridge Clinic, principal partner of DataSphere Nigeria Limited, and the immediate past president of Healthcare Federation of Nigeria, where she championed access and women's empowerment. She also advocates environmental sustainability through the Dawn Project. I am your host, Dr. Oluwatoyin Smith, also a member of the Chartered Institute of Directors and a member of the Health Sectoral Group and CEO of Torset Medical Advisory Limited. It is my pleasure to moderate today's conversation. Thank you once again for joining us. Sit back, stay with us, and lean into this important conversation as we explore what pressure at the top is really costing our leaders and what must change. You are listening to the Directors Dialogue, the official podcast of the Chartered Institute of Directors, Nigeria. Dr. Pamela Ajayi, leadership at the top of our institutions comes with immense pressure. From a clinical and medical perspective, what does prolonged stress actually do to the body and mind of a leader?
Thank you for that question. What is stress? Stress is something that actually happens naturally. And the response to stress is actually called the fight or flight response, which enables us to get ourselves out of critical positions and respond to an acute crisis. When that happens, there's a rise in certain hormones, what we call the stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. There's some hormones that come into play that enable you, for example, in the long distant past, to have a lion come up against you. You then have to, get yourself ready. Those hormones, they clear your mind. They make you instantly able to run away, to face whatever danger is confronting you. So when we talk about prolonged stress, it is when stress is continuous. And when we look at, for example, our directors in Nigeria today, they face prolonged stress for many reasons. There's the issues to do with the organization. There are the issues to do with the general environment, the stressful environment, and there are issues to do with, for example, economic volatility, the change of, the exchange rates. There's so many reasons why directors face stress, both inside the company and outside. That prolonged stress, physiologically, your body continues producing these hormones. These hormones are supposed to go up in your response to danger and then go down again. But now your body is keeping those hormones at a high level. So what does it do? It affects you both physically and mentally. Physically, your body becomes exhausted with this elevated levels of the hormones. Your body's immune response to disease drops. Your certain metabolic changes take place within you. And then there are certain things, for example, disruption of your sleep cycle. There's certain things like anxiety. There's so many things that go in. But very important for the directors is that over a long period of time, you lose clarity. You lose focus. You as a leader, you may still appear to be performing well, but you're actually not performing that well. Because externally you're performing well, but internally your capacity is gradually being eroded. So at the top, the pressure doesn't always break the leader. It just gradually reduces their clarity and the way they respond. In particular, it affects their decision making. And as you know, the directors at the head of the organization are relied on to make those decisions that can make or break the organization. And this is where prolonged stress needs to be recognized and it needs to be dealt with.
Yes, thank you very much for that. You have actually touched on how it does affect the cognitive function and decision making at board level. Now, many leaders believe that pressure sharpens performance. From your professional experience, could you share with us at what point does pressure stop being helpful and starts becoming harmful?
Now, it's very difficult to say a precise point because pressure does sharpen performance because there's an immediate stress, there's an immediate danger. Having that pressure, having that instinct or that kick in, the hormones kick in to help you overcome it is good because you need to react to certain things at certain points. But having it prolonged, which is what we find particularly in our environment, there's actually something called the adaptive theory, pressure adaptive theory. That is, you are under pressure and after a while your body adapts to that pressure. Then your body actually doesn't recognize it as pressure anymore. Now thinks of it as normal. So even though you as an individual are not performing well, your body thinks it's normal and continues to function, even though you're not resting well, you're not eating well, you're not doing things the way you used to, but your body doesn't recognize that. It keeps on going. And that's where this is where the problem comes in, because then the directors or the individuals, the leaders at the top start seeing that as normal and saying, look, I'm so used to this pressure. I function with this pressure and I keep on going with this pressure. Let me keep on doing it. But there comes a point at which the pressure becomes burnout and then there's a decline. So what happens is that there's emotional exhaustion, there's cognitive overload, reduced executive function, and at a leadership level, that results in slower processing, reduced strategic depth, and impaired judgment. And this is critically a point at which it affects how decisions are made. But it's a very difficult position to actually pinpoint and say, that's exactly when it happened.
Okay.
And it's just important to recognize the process and so that it can be interrupted before it goes too far.
It's interesting. We have a lot to take cognizance of. There is also the silent culture. There's a culture of holding it all together. Why is it so difficult for our senior leaders and directors to admit they are actually struggling, even when it is affecting their health?
Now, what I would say is that it's a common culture, particularly in our environment. Leaders are meant to be strong. Leaders are who everybody looks up to say, how are you coping? And you're not allowed as a leader to show vulnerability. Vulnerability is equal to weakness. And in our society, that is frowned on. And in fact, I would actually say across board, leaders are expected to be strong. And so they don't have a way to talk, to discuss their issues. They are, there's a syndrome they call loneliness at the top, where you're there alone, you have no one to talk to, you're not allowed to express fears or issues because it's seen as weakness. And they feel that a weak leader will destabilize the company. And so you're isolated. And it's part of the issues that we're talking about. And these are some of the issues that cause problems. And the turning point, I would say, comes when pressure is constant and cumulative and without recovery. Because as I mentioned before, it's so important that even if you have pressure, there's time to let the pressure out. And it's very important that that expression, a leader can have an opportunity to express issues, to discuss things. And it's very important that boards note this, and that we don't have not just issues with the leaders, but also subsequent issues with their teams.
Right. So it's good for us, even at the board level, to ensure that when we do notice these signs, one takes time out to ensure the director seeks medical attention.
Well, yes, I think the first thing to do is to recognize it. What are the early,
what are the early warning signs?
Yes. Okay. How do you know that these signs are not just leadership pressures, that they can be looked at as and can be seen and dealt with? So, for example, early signs are subtle. Things like persistent fatigue, irritability, withdrawal, disrupted sleep, reduced concentration, decision fatigue. But also things like increased cynicism, loss of motivation. These are some of the things that happen with leaders. And when the leader looks at it and calls it just a busy period, it is often an early stage of cognitive overload. And it's so important that even smaller signs that people don't recognize. Sometimes it's overeating, sometimes it's undereating, sometimes it's just being stressed. Sometimes leaders actually focus on delivering, they're more risk averse during this period. Some leaders they take more risks during that period. So it doesn't actually show in one form in all people, because people are different and they manifest these things differently. And so what is important is that the board recognizes that it is not just about organizational governance, but it's also about leadership governance and leadership sustainability, and knowing that these are issues that need to be addressed and are actually looked at on the board level to make sure that there's sustainability within the organization.
Absolutely. I agree with that. From a neuroscience or clinical standpoint, how does chronic stress affect judgment, risk-taking, and strategic thinking in leadership roles?
Okay. How does it? Because chronic stress affects the brain's executive function, it reduces activity in areas to do particularly with long-term thinking and complex reasoning and balanced judgment. So how does it affect you? Because it's usually a reactive, you're constantly reacting, you find that the stress makes you place more reliance on instinct and pattern recognition. And what you have is short-termism. You have distorted risk assessment and reduced strategic, foresight. Under sustained pressure, leaders don't just stop making decisions. They make narrower decisions and things that don't help the organization in the long term.
Yeah. So if a director is listening to us today and they are under severe pressure, what are the first medically backed steps that they should take immediately to stabilize themselves?
I'm so happy you're actually talking about this. I think this is all about really preventive health. It's not just about when they reach that point, when they know that they're at breakdown point and they're about to break down completely.
Yeah.
Because, within what I'd call burnout is the fact that, they said there are 12 stages of burnout. One, close to the last stage, the 11th stage is depression, and the 12th stage is actually physical and mental breakdown, where a person actually has to take time out and leave the organization for a period of time. So before you get there, you want to be looking and saying, how can we prevent ourselves from getting there?
Yeah.
And I think there are three areas that we need to look at. And one is self-care. The second is work-life balance. And the third is interpersonal relationships. So if I can start with self-care, it's very important that our leaders and our directors pay attention to their health, because all of these things lead to health issues. They can lead to hypertension, they can lead to overeating, etc., leading to diabetes. They can lead to so many health problems along the line. First thing is, are you eating well, safely, nutritiously, not overeating, not undereating? 2, are you exercising? Because exercise actually has been shown to produce a lot of endorphins and relieve stress. It's actually a way of relieving stress.
Yes, it is.
Then a third one is, are you sleeping enough? Now, some of the symptoms, which include anxiety, etc., stop people from sleeping well. So it's so important that you notice if you're not sleeping well and take some of those steps to make sure you're sleeping properly. Another one would be, how do you cope with stress? Some people do deep breathing. These are stress coping mechanisms, deep breathing. Some people do meditation. There are different ways in which you can cope with stress. But the most important, I would say, for every director is take time out. There needs to be time taken out to actually live life. Because if you keep going up and the pressure keeps being sustained, you have to have periods where you calm down. What is recommended is that you take, and I know this is a theory because it's so hard to take this time out. And it's just, how do we manage to do it? Knowing it, understanding it, and finding a way to work it into our schedules. It's recommended you take 5 minutes out every hour just to switch off and
Not do anything.
recoup your mental stress, or your mental strength, shall I say, and reduce that mental stress. But it may not be possible for you to do it but is there a way that at the end of each day you can decompress? There needs to be a focused assessment on that. And the last one is having health checkups. Catching some of those, shall I call them, complications of stress before
Early.
before it becomes a problem, before they say, the man slumped, or this happened or that happened. Because that's all part of self-care. The second part is work-life balance. How do you balance your life? You need to make sure that you try, and this is so hard, and I know because a lot of directors are owners of organizations, particularly here. And to separate their personal life from your work life is very difficult. But it's something that needs to be looked into and say, how can we do this? The second is, take your holidays. You're laughing. We talk about taking holidays,
Very important.
but often do we take our holidays? When I say I've gone, for example, to Italy to rest, and I've carried my laptop and I'm still having my Zoom meetings, and I'm still, are you taking a holiday? Are you taking a break? It's so important that we take some of those breaks and actually decompress and reduce the stress that is there. So I think it is so important that when we talk about this differentiation, protecting our thinking time, structuring recovery, which includes things like the holidays, and also interpersonal relationships, setting boundaries. Now, that's where work-life balance and interpersonal relationships sort of blur into each other. Can you set boundaries? Can you say no? Often we feel as leaders we have to just be there constantly, leading the charge. Sometimes you have to be able to say, no, I can't do this, and step back from it before you break. And so it's important to look at saying no, protecting family time. Sometimes we find that leaders, at the end of the day, they're alone. They spend all their time working, building organizations, they've neglected their families, and they turn around and look around and
Nobody's there.
Nobody is there. And so it's so important that is done. And also, if the leader can find a safe space, 2 or 3 people that they can talk with honestly, they don't have to be within the organization. They can be outside the organization, but people they can actually talk to. There are places, for example, like the YPO have forum and so on, that you can actually find a safe space to talk about some of these issues. A space where you can safely be vulnerable. That also goes a long way to helping manage the crisis that burnout can bring.
Thank you very much for that. And to our listeners, it's important for us to recognize those key points that she has mentioned. Self-care, work-life balance, setting boundaries, and conducting our annual health checks routinely. Institutional responsibility, we need to touch base with that. From an organizational perspective, what responsibility do boards have in protecting the mental and psychological well-being of their executives?
It's very straightforward. Boards have a responsibility to ensure leadership sustainability, simply because leadership performance. Leadership performance drives organizational outcomes. And the board's job is to ensure good organizational outcomes. Okay. So that means you have to recognize, the board has to recognize a burnout as a governance risk. It is a risk. And there's an importance or a need to embed support structures into the board and into the governance and ensure that we create psychologically safe environments for the leaders. Because leadership well-being is not a personal issue. It is actually a board level responsibility. Right. Because when we look at the board, or we look at the organizations, particularly in Nigeria, you find that the leader is actually compensating for a lot. Often poor infrastructure, the leader is compensating for it personally. Lack of staff or staffing issues, you find that, again, the leader is compensating for that as well. Right. There are so many levels at which the leaders are being overstretched in our environment. And this leads very seriously to a burnout risk. And it's important that the boards take cognizance of that.
We need to reframe the strength. If you could redefine what strong leadership means from a medical and psychological standpoint, what should it look like in today's high-pressure workplace environment?
So traditionally, strong leadership has always looked at like resilience, how strong is he? Endurance, the person can, keeps managing and all that. And constant availability. Okay, so you call on him for X or call on her for Y, and they're always there, always available. And this needs to shift to clarity under pressure, the ability to actually pause and recalibrate, because that's so important is that we need to sustain performance over time. So it's not just, we had a one time. Yes, a one night wonder, or just achieve now and then you see the gradual decline over a period of time. But how does the person sustain performance over time? And what I would say is that strength is not just about carrying everything. It's about knowing what cannot be carried alone. Because often that is the problem. The leaders are carrying the whole world on their shoulders alone, and they need to know when that load needs to be shared, when that burden needs to be carried by others, and when to ask for help.
Delegate responsibilities accordingly. If every director is listening today and could adopt just one medically proven habit to improve resilience and performance, what would you recommend?
I would recommend that they have to protect their recovery time. They have to have recovery time, and they need to protect that recovery time, because leaders who last are not the ones who keep pushing the hardest, but actually those who can recover most consistently. And so it's important that they protect their recovery time. But you asked me for one, but the second is also to take real cognizance of their health care. Because their health, without health, they can't run the company. If you have a stroke tomorrow, you are out. There's so many things that people think they are the Iron Man and they will never break. But they need to make sure that they protect their recovery time and they make sure they take care of their health to make sure that they're in it for the long term and that their leadership is sustainable.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pamela Ajayi, for those powerful insights. Protect your recovery time and undertake your annual health checks. I'm a very serious advocate for that, and it is very important. As we bring this conversation to a close, one thing is clear. Pressure at the top is real, but the cost of ignoring it is even greater. We've heard today that the leadership is not just about endurance or pushing through. It's about clarity of thought, the quality of judgment, and the capacity to lead sustainability over time. And those things are deeply affected by how we manage the pressures we carry. Perhaps the most important takeaway is this: leadership well-being is not a personal luxury. It is a governance imperative. Because when leaders are overwhelmed or depleted, the impact is felt far beyond the individual. It shapes decisions, influences cultures, and ultimately affects organizational outcomes. For those listening, especially directors, executives, and board members, this is an invitation to pause and reflect. What is the true cost of pressure that you are carrying? What are you doing personally and institutionally to manage it? To our guest, Dr. Pamela Ajayi, I thank you so much for your powerful insights, your golden nuggets, for your candor, and for helping to bring such clarity to a topic that is not so often spoken about. At the Chartered Institute of Directors Nigeria, the Health Services Sectoral Group, we remain committed to advancing conversations that strengthen not just our institutions, but the people who lead them.
But there's a huge unspoken risk that leaders have with addiction, because sometimes they become addicts to cope with the stresses they're dealing with. Some say coffee addiction and they laugh it off, but a number of people become alcoholics.
I think it's
to
where you
actually
were
deal
talking about the signs.
They actually, to deal with the stress of what is going on, they sometimes become alcoholics, and some people even use stronger, should I call it substances
Yes.
than that. So it's important that these things are looked into and people recognize them early before they take over the individual and destroy the organization.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, take care of your leadership and, more importantly, take care of yourselves. Thank you.